this is actually a pretty good size. I haven't lectured in a long time, so guys, and I don't want it to be a lecture, so you guys can jump in if you need to. And I'm very excited to talk to you about kind of some of the things that I see ahead that in textiles, apparel, and manufacturing. So I'm here actually wearing 3 hats. My original background is wireless telecommunications. So I started in 1990 with a startup that eventually turned into T-Mobile today. So I was with 8 of the founders. I was the financial planning person. So my title was manager of financial planning. So I wrote all the business plans. Left that, started part of a startup that acquired Spectrum. So I've seen technology grow from idea to infrastructure and product, and so that's one hat. I also own and run a large defense apparel manufacturing business in Puerto Rico, and I would tell you I would never recommend that for anyone. Anybody in the textile apparel industry knows it is not a good move from technology to apparel. However, you'll see in this presentation that with new materials and technology that's being developed, I actually think it's the most exciting field to be in. So you couldn't have told me this 10 years ago or 12 years ago. You couldn't, certainly 5 years ago it was questionable, but with the Institute and the materials that we're developing there, I think you'll start to see that we're building the foundation for something that's incredibly exciting. And so I'm going to start with the idea that textiles, as we know, have been around for thousands of years and are really the earliest forms of human consideration in terms of what we want to present to others. And we started asking the question, why hasn't this material, why haven't our garments, why hasn't it changed into a high-tech industry like others have? And we started asking that question, and so what you're going to see is that I have a story that I like to go through that shows the evolution of what it's taken other industries that have become very successful to move from vision, material change, technology, and then ultimately lifestyle. And I think you're going to see that today there's a convergence between fabric, 21st century technology like our iPhone. And I think what's most important that's in place today to start to make textiles interesting is cloud computing. So the 3 of those together now enable us to actually have a platform or network that we can start to work from. And I hope that by the end of this discussion, you'll see that we're actually on a trajectory to make it happen. And so before I start, I want to talk about AFFOA and being part of one of Manufacturing USA institutes. There are 14 institutes. We're number 8. Our focus is on fibers and textiles. However, we work very closely with others like ARM, which is the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute, and NextFlex, which is flexible electronics. The institutes are a public-private partnership with the goal of actually helping industry with innovation and providing facilities so that industry members can go and work with new equipment and technology and training. AFFOA's mission is really, this is exciting. I know it's more than just a statement. We were really looking to enable domestic manufacturing based on revolutionary fibers and fabrics. So you're going to see when I talk about fabric, I'm really talking about devices. I'm talking about fabric devices. And so what AFFOA has developed is fiber devices. So you think about it at the thread and yarn level, that we can actually start to put device capabilities in those yarns. And my colleague downstairs is actually talking about specifically how he does it and what that means. So ultimately, my focus and where I come in is that we're developing what I consider the new software. So fabric is a software. I want you to think about that. Think about the clothing that you wear actually communicating and doing things from a functional level that's never been thought of or done before. And I'm going to start my presentation really around transforming industry, and going from kind of the vision, which we all have, right? We all have a view on where we want things to be, and turning that into a lifestyle. And so for me, from my own personal experience in telecoms, I've witnessed it firsthand. And there's a lot of good and there's a lot of difficulty ahead. And so I'm going to use an example about Duralumin and what that did to the aircraft and airline industry. And these are material breakthroughs that ultimately turned into technology that now is used today as part of products and changed a lifestyle of how we live. So silicon into technology like the iPad, fiber optics into the internet, and then last but not least is multi-material fibers into digital textiles. And again, what we realize is you can have a vision, you can have the material change, and you can create the technology, but how do you move that into product and then ultimately into a lifestyle? If we get into a lifestyle, which is really the ultimate goal, then it becomes ubiquitous, and then you have an industry. And so, starting first with aircraft, planes. It's ironic that 300 miles from here, the first, 116 years ago, the first flight took place. You realize that? It's just 300 miles, 116 years. The Wright brothers aren't the first to have the idea to fly. Humankind has always thought about flying. It's if you look at history, we've never been able to achieve it until recently, just 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago, and it would have still been a novelty and remained a novelty, based on balsa wood and fabric configuration, had we not developed and found new materials. In this case, it was Duralumin, which is extremely lightweight, durable, and enabled engineers to put together design structures that enabled planes to fly faster, higher, and have more capabilities. But with this technology and these new materials, it really wouldn't have turned into products or what we see today, a lifestyle, had it not been for other things around it that became part of a system, right? Much bigger than just that material change. The material, going from the vision to that unique material that enabled them to start playing with it, and to start to redesign it, to create the technology that they can start to use and to create aircraft, was one thing. But to actually make it into a lifestyle, into a product, required a completely different industry. And in this case, it was World War I that actually accelerated the growth of the aircraft industry. And that's because we moved from balloons for reconnaissance to airplanes. But then we realized that airplanes could be weapons as well, and so that required us to rethink what the aircraft can do. And so we constantly pushed the limit and then started looking at, so how do we keep those planes in the air? We need them. You need places to refuel, you needed runways, and next thing you know, over time, we start to build the infrastructure that's now in place today that we take for granted when we get on a plane and fly across country and land and know that plane has fuel. All that was done as part of a system to develop that technology that was created from the new material. And so you can see it in others like electronics. This is another great example, and that's where in World War II we always looked at trying to create computers. The vision of creating a computer has been around for centuries. I think the first one was created in England in the early 1800s, the 19th century. It was a mechanical computer. In this case, the Army had the idea we'd like to figure out artillery projections, and so they created a computer called the ENIAC. And it's 30 tons, 18,000 tubes. I actually bought one of the ENIAC tubes recently, just to have it. It's the size of a light bulb. So you imagine 18,000 of these heated up in a room that's 30 tons. It's mind-boggling to think today when we can carry it in our hand, something that's at least a couple 100,000 times more capable. But what really took that vision of wanting having a computer and having the ability to do advanced calculations, to making it into something that we know of today, was a material breakthrough. In this case, it was ultra high purity silicon. And what I want you to understand is that if you start to look at from the time the vision has occurred and the vision was in place where they actually made the breakthrough, to the time there was a material breakthrough, to the time that there's new technology that now enables it to be turned into product, is decades. Not years, decades. In some cases, 5, 6 decades. But in this case, you can see that the evolution determined product from the time that the actual transistor was created was about 40 years and 30 years. And so I share this because we're in an industry today that's nascent. It's very early. We have incredible technology at the fiber level and the fabric level, but there's a lot of people out there that say that, look, it's not really working, it's going nowhere. They don't understand the time scale to get to the point where we now have iPads that are ubiquitous. Took 40 or 50 years from that first material breakthrough. And you can see the same thing in communications. Again, I like this one. The vision of communicating through light has been around for the late 18th century. And Alexander Graham Bell, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, created the photophone, where you could look across the river in New Jersey and actually communicate with somebody via light. And so I find it actually amazing that was in his mindset to say, wouldn't it be great if we used light as a form of communication? And so it really didn't come into play till almost 100 years later when we created fiber optics, which again was great, but didn't have the capability until we actually created technology to enable us to make that fiber optic be able to carry information over long distances. And now today, we just take for granted that we have the internet and we have this ability to communicate. But I can share with you that in the early 90s, we were debating, it was a big debate because it was financially based, of whether to drop fiber to the home or fiber to nodes or fiber to a city, and then how to distribute fiber to the homes from there. This is before we knew that there was going to be an internet, but we knew that at some point we're going to be able to transfer and carry lots of information across this pipe. And at that time, the cable companies really had the monopoly, and they controlled the information flow, and they thought their coax cable was much better. But it was a decision that took place in the early 90s to invest in fiber to put into the ground, so that today, now we just take for granted that you have high-speed internet in all these locations. But that was a decision that was 20, 30 years ago. And so what really excites me, and the reason why I'm here, is, and again, I want to go back and if you look at the time scales, it's really important to understand that great changes, big changes like this, don't happen in a few years. It's decades or multiple decades from vision, material change, technology to actual product. And so when we look at connected textiles, again, I found this is amazing. These ladies put light bulbs in the late 19th century on their dresses and on their forehead. And they thought it'd be great. Imagine in the late 19th century, having cords on your clothing so you could light them up. But the concept was that they really thought it'd be a great way to, demonstrate, technology. And you can see this is the first wearable, in my opinion. It wasn't a good use case, and I don't think it really went anywhere. But today, what I'm excited about is that we have new materials. And if you're not familiar with the work that's been done at MIT and Dr. Fink, the idea of creating fiber devices it's incredible. And this is not something that just started 3 years ago. Dr. Fink's research started in the mid-90s. And so this is now in the second decade. So we now have materials, using multi-materials, that have full device capabilities. And so that really would go nowhere unless we created a system in which we can actually put it into use. And so what I'm using here is our distributed foundry, where we use companies, academia, and government from all different industries and different perspectives to help them and help us, hopefully, develop new products that would potentially be interesting for consumers and ultimately turn into a lifestyle. This chart's going to become more exciting as we start to envision what these new materials can do. And so I'd like you to think about it from the context of vision, the impact of new materials to the environment, technology, is taking that material, now putting it into a system form where it can then be used. Our material, our fiber devices are worth nothing unless we have a network around it that we can connect to. And so we're not going to move this industry along as one company or one institute. one college or one state. It's going to require a consortium, a coalition of industry, academia, and government to make this really into something important. And so for me, we're now focusing on fiber devices with fabric services. So the idea is that we can change the business model if we think about fabrics as the new computer. I know it's going to sound like, yeah, this is wishful thinking. It's way out there. It is out there. It is a ways away. I'm not going to lie to you. 2 years ago, I thought we were closer, and we could demonstrate. We've done almost all the pieces. We've actually today have all the pieces in place to make a wearable mobile device, something that I can actually deconstruct this and put it into fabric. We have all the pieces done already. So the question is, what's going to take to get it to a product that consumers are going to buy, but ultimately will become a lifestyle. And when we do that, we've just changed and transformed the industry. And so for me, this is a chart that was in a study that NC State put together as to why wearables failed. And I love this chart. I'm not putting this to damper what I've just spoken about, but I think it's really important to stay away from this kind of peak of inflated expectation. And I can tell you from telecoms, I witnessed it. My group was the first one to bring GSM, which is ubiquitous today, to the United States. It was in Europe and it was in Asia. And I spent a lot of time here in the curve of telecom pitching investment banks. I can tell you, I had one where I pitched them 30% of my business plan based on GSM's 3G technology. This is in the mid-90s. 30% of my business plan in 5 years, so I would have put it in 2000 roughly, was data. I had 3 heads of major banks. The heads of these investment banks, the largest in the world, tell me, Eric, data will never be big, it's voice. And they declined. But this was at that peak where selling. Nothing was there, nobody saw anything. What happens is, this is absolutely real. And this is, I think, where we are as an industry today. There's a lot of disillusionment, there's a lot of hype. And so for me, I try to stay away from the hype. I always use the Skechers shoes as an example. Nobody wants tennis shoes that light up. I'm sorry. I mean, if that's what we're doing, if we're talking about, creating technology and apparel, and you're lighting up shoes or lighting up pants, guys, it's gone, it's over. There's no use case for it. It's child's play. So for me, how do we get through this and actually get to a point where we now can think of this as a real business and a real industry? And that's the goal. And it's not just us as an institute, it's not just us as a university, but it's a coalition of industry and academia and government. And it's going to require a tremendous amount of investment by both federal and state government for infrastructure to support it. But I can share with you, we're on the curve right now. And what I tell people is follow the money. When the investment banks start investing, you know that they can actually see the point where it's going to turn into product. And so right now, and again, telecoms, there's a lot of, think of this in the late 90s. That point is the peak in 2000 when Alan Greenspan said there's an irrational exuberance in the market. What happened to the market? It did this, and it took everything down. But that happened with the internet. But look at where the internet is today. Nobody like me that had money in it, in telecoms, and the internet, would say back in 2000 that it was ever going to come back. But today, I can't even, I look at Google. Google didn't exist. You look at Facebook, it didn't exist. In 2000, it was at the peak before it crashed. And I can honestly tell you, my company went from $54 a share to $2.75, only because Alan Greenspan said there's an irrational exuberance. So I use that when I think about where we are, where if we hype up this technology too much, we're thinking that we're closer than we really are. What's going to happen is you're going to see a significant drop. For advanced functional fabrics, this is really what we're doing. This is a picture. We like it to show that that's one of our fibers with an LED in the fiber itself. You can see the connectors going through it with the head of a needle, just to show you size. And this was just done with a camera phone. But this is an example. What we're saying is we're getting to the point now that this LED is not because we're putting lights in and we want to light up our pants or light up our shirts. It's really because we can show you where the chips and the chipsets can go at that scale. And you're going to see why I say this. because we're advancing so quickly, partly due to Moore's Law. We talked about this. This is something I think is extremely important to pay attention to. That with our fibers, that we've created the Moore's Law within fibers, just like the computer industry, electronics industry did in the 60s. And that is, we can see a doubling of capacity in short periods of time. And Moore's Law is every 18 months there's a doubling of capacity. What we're seeing, because we're so early on the curve, that doubling of capacity is probably every 90 days. A major breakthrough. And again, my colleague down below is a reason why. He can actually walk you through it. And the other piece is that once we can start to create fabric systems that are actually worth or have value, we can actually start to look at fabrics as a service. Which again, I go back to my telecom model, which didn't exist, and most people just take for granted today that our cellular service, the rate plans that you have, are in place. That that always existed. But when I started in 1990, there were no rate plans. The rate plan that I had was $3 a day, 99 cents a minute. That's not a good rate plan. And so for creating that service model, we went back and looked at the cable model as an example. And to get to that point, you have to build a tremendous amount of infrastructure to have fabric as a service. But that's the ultimate goal. If we can get to that point, now we can create value in apparel that's never existed before. It changes from 19th century, as we consider it and think about it, as a 19th century manufacturing endeavor to 21st century technology. And our goal is to say, why isn't fabric, why isn't apparel technology? Why can't we make our clothes like devices? And so, what excites me, this is just an example of our preforms. This is a photo detector in it, but you can start to look at scale. And I share this because really what makes this happen is just three things. There's an insulator, a conductor, and a semiconductor. And that's why we can, with those three basic elements, we can actually create devices. And so my goal, and what's got me excited is, I was preparing for a speech at the Sensors Conference in California last May, and IBM in March announced that they created the world's smallest computer. I don't know if you ever tracked this, but if you look at this one picture on the left is 64 motherboards, 2 computers on the tip of his finger. What's more exciting is that chip is a single computer. And when you look at the hundreds of thousands of transistors they have in that motherboard, you realize, look at the scale. And it gets better. So going back to Moore's Law, this was in March. By June, right before I spoke, University of Michigan came up with this device, which is about 1/10 of the size as the IBM device. And it's a sensor. It's a chip that senses. And you start to think of the scale. This is a grain of rice. And so I share this because now with fiber packaging, and what we've created is fiber packaging. It's not just like a yarn, it's a form of packaging for the electronics industry. And that's why you have to think about these new devices. And again, it's a real mindset. We're moving away from a single use to now we can create devices in yarns that are inherently part of the yarn. So what do you do with it? So where I get excited and why I'm here is this is the way I think. Is I immediately put the two together and said, guys, we can make fabric computing. We have the ability. We have the foundation blocks. The foundation's there for actually creating a fabric computer. So the question is, what do we do with it? What's the use case? And that still has to be developed. And this is why I go back to telecom, because I can tell you, in the mid-90s, we never saw the Apple iPhone in 2007. We didn't see that use case when we were developing the networks in 1995. Nobody saw it. But had we not developed the pathway and put the foundation in place with the networks, we would never have this ability to have a smartphone. So we're doing the same thing now, where you start to think about fibers as a new form of packaging. And again, I'm throwing this out to you because I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that if we can start to make a fabric computer, it changes the world, because the floor we're working on can now calculate, or the chair we're sitting on, or the drapes, all have processing power there, not somewhere else, but processing, real processing power. And if you go back and look at these chipsets, the processing power of this chip, it's not on here, was significant So this isn't, it's an 8086 processor. I had one of those in my computer in 1986. I mean, that's real processing power. So you start thinking about the next generation of wearables, and that's why I want to get away from the kind of the Skechers model where it's shoes that light up. But next generation of wearables, what does that mean? And so we've looked at, this is our roadmap. This is roadmap 1.0. We've got roadmap 2.0, but I can't show it. But the check marks show you how quickly we've moved along and identified and worked on these goals. And I think some of the big ones for me that really are exciting was the battery fiber, the supercapacitor fiber. So when you start thinking about what's going to move this industry is the ability to power your device, right? You can't be wearing a puck that's the size of a phone. It's another thing you clip on. It has to be inherent. If you're going to make something that actually works that people want to buy, you have to be able to self-power it. So the battery fiber is a really important one, which we expected to do next year or the year after. We actually did it last week. We developed first generation last year. We're now iterating very quickly. So you'll see I have some slides that show you actual the ground that we've covered. But color changing, that's an extremely important one for us. Body customized apparel, the idea that it can change shape. All these things are demonstrators today. They're not in product form. We're a long ways out. And I'll be honest with you, that's why I put the charts, the first charts to show you that it's not a year or 2 years or 5 years, it's decades. And so, however, we would never get to a point where we can create real meaningful product unless we start to go after these areas of opportunity. This is just to show kind of our demonstrators in terms of capabilities. Again, the big one for me that may or may not get you excited is the clip to connect. How do you interconnect a garment that may have 10,000 connections? And how do you do it eloquently in a way that can be done without actually having somebody solder every wire, which is what we're doing today. So the clip to connect was developed by the gentleman down below, who's speaking in the conference down below, which is ingenious. It's a small, I'll show you, I have a picture of it. This is smaller, this is about a quarter the size of a penny. And so it's the first generation of figuring out how do we take connected fibers and then be able to interconnect them into a fabric. The other big one for me, color change, I'll show you a little bit about. Fabric comms is the goal. Is being able to use your fabric as a means of communication. And I'm not talking about color and blinking lights and things like that, but I'm actually talking about voice communication directly through your fabric, through the light. How do we do it? We have what we call our Fabric Innovation Network. This is really a distributed foundry. When I worked at AT&T, we developed the same thing. We had 5 foundries. And it's a great concept, but we never did anything like this where we took people from all aspects of industry and try to bring them together to say, look, if we have an idea and we want to develop it from, go from ideation to product, we can't do it with one company. We can't do it with one university. We have to tap the folks that actually have equipment, knowledge, experience. It could be at any level, whether it's a sock or underwear, undergarment, because we don't know, or it's sportswear or it's military garments. We need to leverage that experience. And so our idea was to create this approach where we can then, look at our ecosystem and say, if we have a project we want to run through the Institute, what's, who has the capabilities that we can tap into? So this is, again, one part of building the system. It's not the complete, but this is an example of what we need to do as an industry to really enable the revolution to take place. And so, as I go through it, how do we execute projects? We have roadmap projects from the government, and this is one with a tactile a fabric where you can control. It's very cool. You can control the volume on a speaker or your television. So if you think about your chairs now, we're developing touch capacitive sensors within your materials for seats that you can actually, with no buttons, you can actually turn up and turn off, whether it's your radio, your television, in your chair, just on the fabric. So again, that's not the use case that's going to be the killer app, but it's the idea that we can start to say our fabrics and our chairs can now start to do things and work as controllers. The startups, we work heavily with startups because we know most innovation actually comes from startups, and those sharing with some colleagues here that a lot of the big brands, we have all the big brands as members of the Institute, but their version of innovation and our version of innovation are two different things. And so real innovation occurs a lot through our startups. And then we're using proprietary projects to fund some cool ideas, and I've got one here that's in place. This is one where you think about fabrics that can sense, right? So Saint-Gobain actually had a project which we tapped into, which enables us to put our material, our fibers and fabrics, into concrete structures, bridges. So we can actually tell and read what that bridge is doing. We can tell if there's a potential negative effect, that affecting that bridge. Something that would potentially say that bridge is at risk or that structure is at risk of failure. And it's this idea of saying, look, looking at fibers and fabric differently than just saying apparel, but saying we can create this ability to put processing thought into those materials. We think is going to create a whole nother avenue of business that we haven't thought of as an industry. This is just one example. We have a 90-day shot clock, so this is for, we call them micro awards. These are small amounts, generally around $50,000 per each, and it's really to take our material out to people that want to put it into their product or put it into the materials. And so what's important, it's a very streamlined process. It's a way for us to move the process along quicker. We try to have product within 90 days. So the goal is, and this came out of the AT&T Foundry, it was the same thing. They had a 12-week time frame. You have to go from idea to actually product demonstratable that you can show by the end of 12 weeks. And this way, it's not a long research project. They're smaller. It gives us more flexibility, and you'll see that we've been able to do a lot in terms of our roadmap by using these projects and funding them through the micro awards. And I think some of the big ones, the Divercom is very interesting. What's not on here is a rope project. I do have it in the slide later, but it's very, very cool. We put processors into a rope. We can actually now think of a rope as an accelerator. So imagine a guy jumping off a helicopter and wanted to know distances as he's going down in speed. And the rope can actually tell him. We can actually look at a rope and identify how long it's been used. And so things like this, I share it because we need to rethink what we think about materials, about fabrics and fibers and apparel. We have this capability. Now we have to build the systems around it to actually make it meaningful. But this is an example of all the stuff that's been done through and some of the players that have worked with us on these micro awards. Fiber devices to fabric systems. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the projects we worked on. This, by the way, is a fish tank, and I put up there, I can show it, but you're not going to get, you have to hear it. We can actually, through modulating light, we can communicate, these are our photodetectors, we can actually communicate through water by shining light on and hitting these photodetectors. We can actually move music or sound via light, even through water. And so the important thing here for us is we're demonstrating, we pulled this fiber, we drew it, we cut it, we connected it, stuck it to a speaker, put it in the water. That's all we did. There's no special treatment. We stuck this fiber in the water. And the idea is to show that this is durable. It's a form of packaging that doesn't exist for technology today. You wouldn't stick your phone in the water. But yet, here, through these photodetectors, we can actually pass information. And so unfortunately, I can't show you on this, but if you come up to our institute, I'd be glad to show it to you. It's fun to watch. This is something we started before we actually even got into fiber, really pushed for the fiber development. We said, look, we can create pattern recognition within fabric, both visible and non-visible. And the idea is that we want to go from digital to physical to digital, to start to think about fabric as software, as the idea that you can program your fabric. And so what we're able to show, which is, I think, extremely important, the reason why I'm bringing it up here is that we can make programmable fabric, the first time ever. You can program your shirt, you can program, in this case, we make backpacks. And yes, it's a simple pattern right now. You can see it's a demonstrator. It's to show you the concept that we're able to tie that backpack to an individual, yet it's mass produced. So we can show that now that individual can buy the bag, they own it, and they can actually, through the app and the app development that we've done, they can actually program it to show people or not show people information they'd like to share. And so it's a very, very interesting concept. So I took that a little bit further and said, look, what if we made a jacket that, eventually as AR becomes, ubiquitous, which is going to happen hopefully concurrently. So I go into a room and I can then look, because I can read the pattern in your fabric. I don't need to go ask you for your card. I can look at your LinkedIn summary page just by being able to identify that fabric to an account, and that account being tied to LinkedIn. We've done that. It's done. And what's more exciting is it's software. So think about this. It's the same kind of thought that goes into apps for your phone. It's the same, there's no difference. It has the same architecture. And what we're trying to get you to think about is that, guys, to make this revolution occur, we can't think of it just making fabric softer or, more UV protected or more comfortable. No, let's think about fabric as software. What would we do with it? This is, again, just an example. I'm not saying it's the best one, because nobody wants to look out their phone and point at somebody. I don't think that works really well. But knowing that AR and AR glasses are going to become ubiquitous in the near future, this is a preparation, so we can start to say, as that happens, we can already see that kind of interaction is going to occur. And what excites me more about this is that we think about it from a software programming perspective. As the same architectural layers. And I think that from the physical to the data, it's important to think about what we have to build to make this an industry. And again, it's not one company, it's not one group, it's not one university. It's the idea that if we can get Apple, we can get Microsoft, we can get Google to start thinking about this, or Facebook, you realize that this becomes another form of social interaction. And that's what we demonstrated. So in our conferences we've delivered 3,000 bags, and we can watch the interaction amongst all the individuals based on their communication with the bags. And so you think about this, it's not just, you say, what do you put on your bag? Well, there's all sorts of things you can do. So we started off with very simple, to share a little bit of information about yourself. And then what became very interesting is that we had customers come to us and say, we have a use case. The use case is, we're an aircraft company, and we'd like our customers, a European aircraft company, we'd like our European customers to be able to walk through an airport and not have to look at a ticket, but can look up. In this case, they're using the phone, but again, preparing for AR. Is that you'll be able to walk through and see, where you need to go. You'll be able, it can direct you to your gate, but more importantly, it can direct you to the seat on your plane. And the other thing we've done, we've tested this. These are actual applications that we've tested. This one's for runners. You can look at somebody, and you can give that person can share their statistics. So if you're in a gaming event or you're in a sports event, you could start thinking about, again, software. It's unlimited. It's wide open. It hasn't been done. So the question is, what foundational pieces that need to be put in place to make this now an industry? And that's the question I'm going to pose to you, because this is what we're asking ourselves. We know we have the foundation, the building blocks for a revolution. Why it hasn't taken off? There's a number of reasons. But we know all the parts are being put in place. So this is going to become a norm in the not too distant future. And so when I think about fabric and software, get on the slides, moving, I'm thinking about see if I can get it to move. It likes to slide a lot. So okay, let's see. I think we've got a frozen computer. So speaking of IT, so this is what we can expect later, right? Your clothes are going to freeze up and you go,
So why didn't it take up so far? You said a number of reasons.
The structure, for this to really work, there has to be a structure in place all around it, right? So think about, so how do you charge? Like, how do you charge for this? And so we talk about fabric as a service, but if we have no back-end infrastructure in place for people to pay, right? Nobody's going to want, we're not in the business, we don't have the ability to say, I'm going to charge you $10 a month for this, and put on your credit card. And nobody wants to have 10 charges, and that's what I learned in telecoms, is that we consolidated the bills, right? We said, Originally, we had long distance, local, cable, wireless. MCI 1 I was part of in 1996. We made MCI 1, and the idea there was you consolidated. It was a huge, a huge shift. Same thing is going to have to happen here. I think we have to partner with folks like AT&T, people that have that infrastructure in place, that they're doing the billing already, and that's not done yet. And I think it's really important. These are the things that I think industry can help. But if we think about like Amazon, and I looked at the Amazon model for Kindle. So again, when I started looking at this in 2015, was partnered with AT&T on a wearable antenna that was made out of graphene. And the question is, how do we charge for it? And nobody wants to buy a shirt and says, crap, now I'm going to spend $3 a month on some subscription, and I don't want that bill coming in. I don't want it on my credit card. How do I turn it off? What Amazon did when they looked at the Kindle, and that's the model I used, is they said, okay, we want to provide unlimited 3G. How do we do it? Because the customer's not going to want to get dinged every month for $1 or $2. So what they figured out was the useful life of that customer, and how many books and how many kilobits they can use. And they went back to AT&T. There's an economic model and said, okay, it'll cost $20. They'll use $18.50 in the life of that Kindle. And basically Amazon said, great, I'll charge $50 for it. And you can have unlimited 3G. That's how we have to think when we start thinking about this. It's not there yet. And I think the second piece that's going to be very important is robustness. A lot of what I'm showing you is they're demonstrators, but that's it. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not at a point where we can commercialize it. It needs to be a lot more robust, but that's where industry, that's why the military is so important. We can work to make it robust enough so that it can be used outdoors, can be washed, and not worrying about the electronics coming apart. And again, I go back to the back office piece. I tell my colleagues all the time, look, in telecom, I had call centers for a reason. When things fail, you actually have to answer the call. If you're on a fee for service, guess what? They expect it to work, and you need to be there 24/7. So those are my thoughts. Any other questions while we're waiting? Yeah, I can keep going on this, but it's exciting. It's exciting.
Just restarting it, unfortunately.
Oh,
I think the
sorry.
file size was big, so it's crashed.
Yeah, file size. If technology can go wrong, it will go wrong. So that I do know. But for me, what's extremely exciting is that we have made tremendous progress. Let's go through here. Let's see if we can skip from there. So we can go. It's that little guy that caused it. There it goes. All right, just continuing on that idea about platforms. This is a platform. And what I like to talk about is that fabric will eventually become a chassis, and what you put on it is going to be determined by the consumer, or by folks like what Apple did, with their iPhone, is that they had app developers, who have helped make the iPhone really interesting. But what Apple has is a platform, and on that platform, it's tied to AT&T. It originally was, and that enabled it to be able to communicate. So what we see the same thing is that if we build a platform that the developers can use, and you think about, Apple didn't anticipate when they created this development program that they would be paying $30 billion a year to their app developers. It's a $30 billion a year industry in less than 5 years. And so we see that it can be done. There's some exciting things. This is, for me, the exciting part is for the airport side, is that we can start to develop in the fabric. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the fabric, but ultimately we think it will be headrests and things like that, where you can start to walk in with AR glasses, and the airline can program your seat, so you walk in, you can see your seat. It'll point out. And they look at this from a loyalty program. They're talking to us to say, how do we get our customers, our good customers, how can we recognize them? That's their use case. It's quite interesting. So it's something we're working on. The e-commerce platform side, again, we're using fabric. This is, again, fabric-based. And this this is going to take time to develop, but we've proven we can do it. You can share coffee, you can share more. But the idea is that you see somebody, you can actually connect to them and then send them something if you want to. Think about later in life, with AR, with this in your clothing, you can go into a bar, you see somebody, you can buy them a drink. It'll be the next Tinder. swipe left or swipe right. But the idea is that it's there. It's fabric based. I'm not saying it's the best use case. But I'm just saying that it's there's a number of possibilities. So more exciting for me as a telecoms guy is the concept of fabric communications. And so we're working very, very heavily on this one now. And in this case, there are a number of things that can be done. When you start thinking about autonomous vehicles, we've created garments now that communicate outward. They're not passive. So right now you have reflector tape, and the driver has to see you. So what we see with autonomous vehicles is that we can actually communicate outward. We can be sending the signal out saying, we're here. Here's how I'm and can connect at a certain frequency off of our fabric. And we started to do that. We started to make demonstrators. So the idea is that, again, using the lights can modulate. That LED light can modulate at a certain frequency that we can then tune with the photodetectors to convert into an audible sound. So that light can actually warn, that headlight can warn, long before it sees the person, it can warn that person that a car is coming. So these are things that, again, we see as really potential use cases for the future. They're demonstratable today, but how do you get them out to market and commercializable? We're still a ways away. It's going to take a lot more brain power than mine. The exciting part is, there's a number of different use cases that we've had. If you come to our facility in Cambridge, you can see we demonstrate with a hat. Again, I'm not saying it's the best use case, but a hat with an earbud, you can walk and look with lights like this, walk through, and we can talk to you. We tell the story of the Institute through the light. And it's modulating the LED lights that does it. You can't see it with your eye. But you can start to think about use cases for museums and convention centers. And so that as we go in time, we're going to be able to start to think about new applications that nobody's considering today. Sports venues, we're working with teams today, right now, professional teams, owners of stadiums, to say, how do we engage fans? So we've created caps that can do that, so you can actually do fan to athlete, athlete to fan, fan to fan. And so, again, using the technology, trying to figure out what's the best application. That's not really for us, but it's going to take the market, it's going to take others to help us put this together. But we've created the building blocks. That fiber capability is there. It can be put into fabric. Now we just need to build the use case that makes sense. And then safety, obviously, is a critical one. I show this picture because it really kind of shows you the thought, and you just see the bits and bytes. As the LED lights modulate, they're basically ones and zeros. And we can tune it, which is really exciting because when you walk in, you step out of the light, you hear nothing. You walk into the light, you actually can hear the story, or you can hear the sound, or you can actually communicate. So there's some military applications that are well into play because you can actually put on a flashlight, you can put on a laser, you can put large amounts of data through, and you can start to think about communicating off the fabric to people in distances. This just kind of shows you some of the ideas that people have. This is the fishbowl I was telling you about with the light. We're playing Handel's water music, which is appropriate. The fish don't seem to mind, but it's amazing to think about as a demonstrator that by just moving the light away, it stops. But you can start to then visualize that what's going through that light, this little flickering, is actually ones and zeros. It's converting that analog signal to digital back to analog, and it's an amazing process for us. And the reason why we show it this way is that because we can say we can do it underwater. It's not just in this environment; it can be underwater. So we've looked at underwater comms. That's one of the things that certain divers need, is to be able to communicate from short distances. And so that's an important capability that we're working on. I think the next biggest one for us is electrification. And so this is something, as I mentioned, and if you think about what I'm walking you through, is look at all the components, right? So you look at fabric comms, electrification. In this case, the soldiers, they wear a tremendous amount of gear and technology. So we're saying, how do we lighten that load? How do we provide capabilities for them? And so in this case, it's forcing us to look at, can we replace the existing battery structure? If we can make it robust enough. And again, we're going back to those first slides, we're still very early in the process. We're not there. We can demonstrate it. We can show. We can actually create fibers that hold electricity. So this is an example. Now our lithium-ion batteries can produce 1.8 volts. Our supercapacitor 5 volts. What's amazing is if you look at Moore's law, when we started this about a year and a half ago, and you look at where it's gone from the initial draw to where we are now, it's more than tenfold. We're at 20 charges on the lithium-ion fiber and 15,000 charges on the supercapacitor. So again, the concept is we can start seeing here that this fiber's charged, it actually provides voltage. So again, think about what that means as we start to create fabric systems. And from a business perspective, it's exciting. This is how I look at it. You know, I think there's 10,000 kilometers of fiber that go into a shirt. So we have scientists that actually calculate that, which is pretty interesting. Never thought of it that way, but there's roughly 10,000 kilometers. We can, enough, if we create a fiber that went into a shirt, we could charge multiple smartphones off that shirt. So the question is, you know, we've got to get over, you know, there's a number of things that need to be worked through, like regulatory, you know, hazardous material. You don't want to learn some of the chemistry that's going to be in those fibers. So we need to be thinking about that. But the idea is we can show it. We can prove it. It's underway. It's being put in gear now. Color change. Again, this doesn't look like much, but it's more important than most understand. So this is electrophoretic color change. It's essentially, if you think about the material used in your Kindle. And so we have two forms. We have thermochromic and then electrophoretic. We're looking at two different ways. This is essentially the material in the Kindle. This one, with a little bit of heat, it actually can change color. It's very cool. I can honestly tell you, I've seen, you know, camouflage color change. It's now classified, but I've actually seen color change camo that works. That's absolutely incredible. This is more the electrophoretic approach for us is we fill the fibers, we can charge them, and we can turn them on, we can pixelate them. So what that means is to start to think about, you know, basically, let's see if this, there it is. I don't think you can see it. We're pixelating those fibers. You can start to think about fabric screens and fabric displays. And you see, you know, again, I'm thinking about fabric computing, I'm thinking about fabric communications. And so we're developing and demonstrating all the pieces that break down that, you know, this system that we have today. And so we're at a point now where we can demonstrate it. So the question is now, how do you take it from this to actually making the screen? That's underway, and that's a lot more work. A capability roadmap, I'm just sharing this because to show you on the fabric screen side, it's important enough that we've got a lot of resources on it. And we think that this is going to be, again, a key differentiation as people start to think about the next generation wearables. Last but not least, what's really important for me is product and system integration. And so taking all these pieces, and right now they're just pieces, and then how do we then take them and turn them into actual product? That's still yet to be done. There's a lot of work. And so that's why we rely on our Fin members, our members that have capabilities, so we can actually lever them, put it through their processes, and hopefully make product for them. So we made product for New Balance with fabric comms, you know, for a specific running need. They wanted runners in the New York Marathon to be able to look at them and get information and share information. We worked with Ralph Lauren for the Olympics on a jacket that you can actually look at athletes. What's incredible is you could look at them through the television and get information. And so it's there conceptually. Now, how we get it into product form, how do we actually make it mass producible? All that has to be worked on. And you know, looking at stuff like washability, you know, making the systems invisible. I mean, this is harder than most understand. This is where the rubber hits the road. From a technology perspective, we can make anything. We can demonstrate it once. We can do that. Lincoln Labs does it great. We can create any type of technology you want. How do you actually make it so it works and it's invisible and it actually is durable and something that you can the functions that you can use? That takes a lot more effort. And you know, so we're looking at all these aspects as we go forward. You know, fiber and fabric fidelity is a critical part of this because we know that today, in this form, many people over the past 20 years 25 years have put wires through fabric. I mean, I know the guys at Milliken, I mean, we talked about it in the mid-90s. You know, they were putting LEDs. We're not talking about that. What we're saying is we want it to be so it's essentially, you can't tell it's there. The fiber is wrapped in natural material, so you don't know that there's actual technology in that fiber. You can't tell by feel and touch. But this is stuff that we're working on. It's, again, takes time to get to a point where it's not noticeable. But as I go back to my original part of the discussion, if you look at the evolution of technology, then you know that there's a big gap from material breakthrough and from the technology itself being ready for commercial use. And so again, this is some of the work we're doing on size, improving mechanical properties. So every fiber we look at, as we draw, we look for improvements. How do we make it more robust? And you know, and again, we use these LED lights. It kind of shows us where the chipsets would be. It's not that we want to create LED light fiber. That's not the focus. So last but not least, for me, this is my goal. And the reason why I'm here is, again, I'm bringing my telecoms background into it. And what I saw back in 2015 is the convergence of fabric, comms, and cloud computing. And what excites me is that this is a good demonstrator, because what I've shown you is that these are all the elements that go into a phone, right? That's a phone. We've now deconstructed them. And we're now putting them individually in a fiber. But the goal now is to actually make them a system within a fabric. And if you think about that, for me as a use case, we make real fabric communication or real fabric computing. It changes the way we have to look at apparel. And the secondary and tertiary effects that it's going to cause is similar to this. This is my last slide, I promise. But this one I've lived with. So I've been through this. I've been through this evolution. And I share it because, look, I'm working on 5G right now. There's a national network that's being built. I was asked to come in and help. This is going to change. I keep asking, like, why do we even have this? There's no reason for that. But you can see this evolution. It's quite, you know, I was here, through just a little bit before through here, and I sold a lot of those Nokia phones, and had a lot of flip phones. But this jump, you know, between the 3G and 4G was significant. And you know, you can see that what we're talking about with fabric and apparel and textiles is really the same thing, right? We're starting, you know, we're still at this stage with our material. We'll probably over here, but we are creating the same, essentially, economic model that the handset manufacturers have. And we can, I think, you can see in 20 years or 30 years the jump that occurred. And this is why I go back to setting expectations. We're not talking 2 years from now, we're going to have a wearable mobile device. In 30 years, I guarantee you we will. I guarantee you in 30 years we won't be carrying these phones. These won't exist. And we'll laugh about it. Like, remember, I had a TI-55 calculator I used to wear on my belt? Where is that? You know, I bought a lot of photography equipment. I have great 35 millimeter cameras. I mean, I have all this stuff that's now sitting in the closet that's worthless. Can't sell. It's gone. Just because one technology, you know, 20 years ago, basically replaced it. And so I see the same thing here with apparel and technology, and I hope you guys do too. And that's really it for me.